Friends, back with you again. Wouldn't you like to hear Shane Claiborne talk about the current racial climate in America with all the stuff that's happened in the last month? Wouldn't you love to maybe hear him talk about Louis Giglio's crazy comments made in the presence of Lecrae, or maybe even what's going on at Church of the Highlands with Pastor Chris Hodges? Wouldn't you like to? Some of you are like, I don't even know what the hell you're talking about because you're so detached from church world and church culture. I envy you. Anyway, for those of you that were like, man, that would be pretty cool to hear Shane Claiborne, the one and only, talk about that kind of stuff. Well, you ain't getting it here. So let me tell you, this past March and April, I worked my tail off to kind of get ahead of things. And so this summer, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get all new content, all new material, new conversations that have not been heard yet, but a lot of them were recorded like 2 months ago. And so it doesn't take away from the quality of the show, but I think a heads up once in a while is important because of just how much stuff is going on in the world. And when you don't hear it addressed, it's like, that's kind of weird. Hey, me, Jory, Micah, and John Mark McMillan kick off the episode. Before we get into Shane Claiborne, we talk a little bit about good people who voted for Trump. Did I just say that? And, you know, my personal deal as far as I don't want to be seen as a Trump-supporting Christian, the sort of Trump was sent by God sort of Christian, and at the same time, I don't want to talk and carry myself in a way where I think I'm better than all them. And so that brings about a unique tension in itself. But anyway, let's just get on with this show. Peace and love. Hopefully, if you listen to this, it just gets your mind off everything going on. Maybe even put a smile on your face. Love you, listeners. Here you go.
I even had a thing the other day where two people got in a heated debate on my Instagram. A heated debate. And they were going back and forth. And I'm trying very hard to be a grown-up. You know, I had strong opinions about both. And I posted something that was to the point but was very kind. And I had both of them separately DM'd me and apologized for the way they acted on my Instagram. But I was very tempted to go for the jugular because I felt like I could have.
Yeah.
But I didn't. And I'm really glad I didn't because that would not have made an impact. I would have gotten back what I put out. You know, which is like outrage versus outrage versus outrage. And I was honest and kind. I was giving and I spoke my mind. And they both came to me individually and apologized. Two separate sides of one issue. You know?
Like Jory, I'm thinking of your situation and how much more productive would it have been if you had someone reach out to you personally and just say, hey, look, I understand that you were doing the best that you could, and maybe you weren't thinking this, but I just want to let you know it's at least off-putting to me personally that you didn't have someone of color, but not someone like. Imagine that. Imagine someone going to you directly out of kindness and out of sincere care for you, or sincere convictions they feel that they need to tell you, but instead of blasting you publicly, actually going to you in a very humble, gentle way. Like, what happened to that?
Right. To be honest, like, I don't even associate with those people anymore. Like, I mean, if they are progressive or ex-evangelicals that are cool, I associate with the cool people. But if they're, I don't want to be around a bunch of bullies.
Right.
And social, like, I love social justice, but I haven't always fit in with the social justice crowd.
Yep. I'm with you. I mean, I think some great examples out there that I've seen recently. Kat Armis, Jay Baker.
Oh yeah.
Jason Petty, who's propaganda. I mean, just the stuff that they've been tweeting and saying, especially about this whole ordeal on Twitter recently. I'm just like, yeah, I'm with you. It's just because here's the thing: there's really no point in interacting with that crowd unless you are willing to be exactly like them in everything they do and say. And you know what? I don't want to. I don't agree with everything, and that right there puts me on the outskirts. And so I don't really even have a choice. I'm not going to be welcomed into them, if I wanted to. With a lot of the disdain that those folks have are very legitimate, very well founded. A lot of them came from like super unhealthy forms of evangelicalism and fundamentalism, and then you just look right now and you see churches dodging the requirements to shut down. Trump is awesome. COVID-19 sent by God. Gays are the worst, and it's like, okay, I get that. A question I've been thinking through is how do people, how does Joey Svendsen here, how do I make a distinction between me and that without being arrogant and prideful myself? Like, in other words, I want people to know, hey, I'm not this guy that gives Trump a thumbs up. I didn't vote for Trump. I think he's not a good person. I don't think he is respectful to women. He is not God's choice of president. I'm not homophobic. I don't think COVID-19 is sent by God. How do I have a distinction there? But I don't want to be a part of that crowd. But isn't that also me saying I'm better than all them? And why is the bad stuff about me and my shortcomings and my weakness less severe than them with how you know what I'm saying? I'm having a hard time with the tension of, I don't want to be seen in that camp, and at the same time, I'm not better than them either.
Are you talking about the Trump camp?
Yes. I'm no better than those people. I'm just not. I think, Paul even tells us in Philippians, consider other people as better than yourselves. So I don't want, and I think for the most part, people don't see me in that camp. Thank God. But I don't want to be lumped in with that. But how, that's my question is, how do you take that position without also being arrogant and thinking that you're better than them?
Right. I see what you're saying. Do you want to say, John?
Sure. So just in general, and I try to do this now. This is not a thing I did when I was younger, but I try when I really heavily disagree with somebody, I try for a minute in my mind before I respond to them to think about why they might feel the way they do. And I try in my opening to try and acknowledge that they may have a good reason for kind of believing what they believe, because certainly they think they have a good reason, and so trying to acknowledge something good in what they're saying, even if they're askew, so like, I know a lot of people I consider to be really good people who voted for Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. I'm not a Trump fan. I know some really good people. Most of them are not like pumped on Trump, but they did vote for him. But I know a few who are, and they're good people. Generally speaking, they're good people. And so I would got to imagine there's got to be a reason they feel the way they feel. And usually people will step into an idea based on one thing, and then they'll just sort of bring the baggage of the rest, like whether it would be like the abortion issue. I have several friends who are like, I can't stand Trump. I don't like Trump, but we got to get new people in the Supreme Court and yeah, and they generally believe that. I don't think they were excited about Trump. And then I think because there's such an outcry against Trump and then against them, then they sort of like, all right, well, then I'm gonna tribe up now. Then I'm gonna tribe up, and I'm gonna take all of it. And they're gonna take on all the beliefs that they really didn't step into the door before. You know what I'm saying? It's not what got them in the door. They got in the door in a genuine way. So I try and acknowledge that, right? And then I try and offer why I would disagree with them without demeaning them as a person. For instance, this argument I got into the other day on Facebook. This lady got mad because I said hell in my post. You know, I was like, well, you don't know me very well. That's what offended you, but you know. And I tried to, you know, but then and a lot of people defended me, and one girl was defending me. She was being very cruel, and she ended up calling the lady who. So the lady wasn't actually mean in her post. I disagreed with her, but she wasn't actually being mean. And one of the girls who was defending me, she ended up calling the lady a Karen. And I was like, why does that bother me? She's defending me. I was like, why does this bother me? I started to ask myself why it bothers me. And I realized it bothers me because it's nowhere on par with a racial slur. It's nowhere on par with that. But it is in the same spirit when you create a category to categorically dismiss a human being based on something they may or may not be able to fully control, you know? And maybe Karen has more to do with your actions, but it's also geared towards when you were born and what you look like and your gender and all that kind of stuff too, right? You know? And I thought, like, this is not effective. You know what I mean? This is totally not effective.
Right.
I totally forgot my point too. I got lost on Karen. But
it's all right. It's all right. I can step in and let you know how I stay humble in this regard. Is my mother voted for Trump, and my big sister actually, she could care less about politics, but she was dating a major Trump supporter while he was running. So you got me on Facebook like, hell no to Trump, you know, and then you got my sister on Facebook who's more theatrical than I am, way more theatrical than I am, you know, basically Trump 2016, Trump everything, you know, selling the t-shirts and everything. So I've had to kind of remain humble to have any sort of conversations with my mom. My sister doesn't really care, so I don't talk to her. But my mom and I, we've gotten a lot of, I barely spoke to her for 6 months after Trump won, because I was so devastated that he won and that my family were in support of him, who taught me to be different than that. And so I was so devastated, I barely spoke to her. But as we started coming to healing that relationship, we started listening to each other a little better. And that's kind of where I'm at now, where I'm just like, man, we're never going to get anywhere if we don't start listening to the other side. You know, I think at the end of the day, we probably agree on a lot more than we disagree on. It's just that everybody's so polarized and hyper-focused on the things they disagree on that we don't talk to people with what they do agree on anymore. We don't find common ground. And I think that's what we're missing here is, like, we have to be people, especially if we're followers of Christ, that find common ground with others, you know, and that's where we start, and be better listeners. And also don't be afraid to say how you feel too. Like, cause if you're anything like me, I'll just hold it down, and then explode. So don't, you know, let people, I think we need to start having these conversations with Trump supporters. And, it's hard because it feels like you can't reason with a lot of them, but you know, there are a lot that are very good people. Like you said, they're not bad people. You know, they're just somehow got caught up. And I talked to my mom about this with the Christian thing too. She says, you know, for many years, Christians have felt ignored. Evangelical Christians have felt ignored. They felt like bulldozed over, basically. You know, things they don't believe in. They don't believe in abortion. They don't believe in gay rights. You know, I mean, they might be okay with gay rights, but they don't believe in, you know, that it can be considered not a sin. Like those are their convictions. And so they feel like those convictions have been bulldozed over so much, and this world has become liberal in their opinion so quickly. And I think that is why a lot of the white evangelicals went for Trump, because he gave them more attention and a voice than Democrats ever did. So, I mean, in a way, you can't blame them, even though
he wasn't a threat to them.
Right. Even though we look at it as you sold out, I
Right.
did that. You're a sellout, on their end of things, they think, wow, someone's finally listening to me. Someone finally cares. Like, even if he's a terrible person, at least he cares about what I care about. That's
Right.
kind of how they look at it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep, for sure. Well, I tell you what, if that army that you were talking about, Jory, listens to this episode, they're coming after us. So
I know. You know what? I've been thinking about that the whole time in the back of my head. Like, oh my gosh, I am in so much trouble.
I actually do think they represent a lot less people than what
Yeah.
we would ever imagine. I
They
really
are
do.
scary, though.
All right, Shane, it's good to have you on here, man.
Yeah, boy, good to talk, man.
I hear after we talk a little bit, you're going to turn some bullets into some garden tools. Is that what it is? Bullets into tools? I've read a little bit about it. There's a little motto, though, a little phrase. What is it?
Well, it's not the bullets as much, although I do have some of them.
Guns.
Here. I got these all from outside my house there, but I'm going to be working with some donated guns, and Katie and I, my wife and I, are both apprentice blacksmiths, and so we got a whole
Nice.
shop here, and we make all kinds of little things. Look at this. Oh, your people listening won't be able to see it, but
Yeah.
making little hearts out of the barrels and making plows and shovels. I made my first 3 shovels the other day, so yeah,
With guns?
repurposing metal. Yep.
Jeez,
I've
that's
got
cool.
I've got quite the arsenal in the basement of decommissioned chopped up guns, man. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's good. I thought I saw a picture of a bullet made into hearts, but maybe that was a part of a gun that was made into hearts. But that's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, man.
Pretty cool. So what's the day in the life of Shane Claiborne these days?
Well,
Besides turning
we're-
guns into tools.
It's just kind of like usual, a little wild. We got a lot of stuff going on locally. Folks that may not know, I'm part of a community here in North Philadelphia that we've been building for 20 years. So there's a lot of things that we've ramped up, to be honest, because there's last count, almost 100 nonprofit organizations that have shut down in Philadelphia during the pandemic. And so we're sharing food. We're trying to do it smartly, and we're doing we have blankets and toiletries, and we got friends that are running showers for people that need them, especially folks that are vulnerable on the streets, because some of us have the privilege of quarantining, but it's tricky if you don't have a house and things like that.
Right,
So we're trying to take care of our elderly neighbors and just be present where we can. So I've been saying we're trying to be cautious and courageous at the same time.
Yeah, I like that. So how do you find people that are in need? Do you know where to go? Like, as far as the homeless population, I'm assuming that would be somewhat easy to find where they are, but how do you know where to go as far as where the needs are?
Oh, well, they're just all friends of ours, really. We've lived here 20 years, so we're in the thick of it, So most people are able to walk here or get here. A lot of what we do is sort of building a little village here, on the north side of Philly, so people know about it. And people, word of mouth, people take care of each other. So if folks see people that are cold or wet or in need of food, they know to direct them over here. And there's other places too, other great places. So, yeah.
Awesome. Cool, man. Well, I'm going to address our listeners real quick. I have a great deal of respect for Shane and his work and what he does. I mean, what he just described, for crying out loud. And I have a lot of questions that have to do with politics in the context of Christian faith. And so my objective here is to hear your point of view. I already know my point of view. And so I want our listeners to hear these questions as probing, but not trying to put Shane in his place. It really is me trying to learn. And so I'll give you, Shane, a little backdrop of myself. So growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, very conservative state, and grew up, parents ultra conservative, and I just was Republican myself. I remember 2004 Bush against Kerry, and I would have been depressed if Kerry would have won. I mean, that's how invested I was. And then 2008, when I thought it was neat for Barack Obama to win, given just that he's a person of color. But I was definitely leaning more towards McCain. I was a staunch Republican, and so from about 2008 on, as time wore on, I just started to care less and less. It just seems to be so much hypocrisy on both sides. And I'm not saying that there's not anyone involved in politics that doesn't have good intentions. I'm sure there are. But man, like, just for example, watching debates, it's like, okay, one of these people, one of them are lying, and I don't know who to believe, because one person's saying this, the other person's saying that's not true, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so even this last election, I think about if Hillary would have won, I don't know how much better that would have been, just because of, like, I don't know what to believe as far as whether or not there was a lot of dishonesty with her and a lot of things that she did. So I don't necessarily see her as a huge win over Trump. If she was elected. I'm not a big Trump fan. Like I said, I've lost interest in politics for the most part. I would say a lot of my views probably lean a little more conservative, but I don't know if this is a cop-out, Shane, but I seriously would say that I just kind of feel very passive when it comes to politics, and I want you to be super honest with me. Do you see that as not an option for Christians?
Wow, well, there's a lot in there, man. There's a lot in there to unpack, and I mean, for starters, I'm going to say that I've been, on this, evolution of who I am, and I like that old scripture that says we're working out our salvation with fear and trembling. I suppose we're also working out our politics with some fear and trembling. But I organized for George Bush when it was, get this, I'm going to show my age a little bit, when it was Bush Quail. Come on, man.
Oh, my gosh.
Misspelled potato or something like that, and
you helped with that campaign?
Well, I was passionately in favor of them, and they came. Okay. I met Dan Quayle. And I grew up, where it was like Christianity was sort of married to the Republican Party. I mean,
absolutely.
and I think what happened for me is my geography changed. Right, I actually got involved here in North Philadelphia. In a neighborhood that has suffered the brunt of some bad policies, and I think what I would invite us to think about is that there's a great article, by the way, I think it was in the Atlantic, that said, "How will this generation change Washington when they hate it so much?" There's a lot of people that are pretty fed up with politics, And what I guess I've come to see is that a part of loving my neighbor means being concerned about the policies that affect their lives. So not ignoring the conversations, for instance, around immigration or guns. Like, I don't just see these as political issues, but they actually are informed really at the heart of our faith. Jesus said, when you welcome the stranger, you welcome me. So I'm trying to think, how can we do a better job at welcoming our immigrant neighbors, refugees, and asylum seekers,
Right.
And there's still a part of me that has many of the same suspicions that you do, about how much politicians change things, and I've come to think of it less as we're looking for a savior and more that we're looking to do damage control of the principalities and powers. So, I've found the savior, and he's not Republican or Democrat, but I do think that there are politicians that have the power to make life easier or more difficult for some of our most vulnerable neighbors. And I think the gospel that Jesus proclaimed is good news to the poor. If it's not good news to the poor, it's not the good news of Jesus, you know. And so I think we should all be concerned about the poor and most vulnerable, and that should be kind of our lens as we're thinking about these things. And just a couple more thoughts on it is when I grew up in East Tennessee, I felt passionately about being pro-life, but I came to see how narrowly we had defined that to the one issue of abortion. Right. And we might be more accurate to say we were pro-birth or anti-abortion, because our ethic of life was really just about abortion. And then I began to see that abortion is not the only issue. I still think it matters. I think it's why a lot of people found Hillary Clinton, and many people now find the DNC very hard to get excited about, because there's not a real consistent pro-life candidate that's for life from the womb to the tomb, you know, that's a champion for life on every issue. And that's my kind of framework, is I believe every person's made in the image of God and has infinite value. And anything that is squashing someone's life or dignity is on the wrong side of God. And we need to be champions of life. And that's also why I wrote my last two books have been on gun violence and the death penalty, because I saw on those particular issues, Christians have actually been the obstacles, I believe, for life rather than the champions of it. I mean, we're for the death penalty at a higher rate than the general population, and we're the highest gun-owning demographic in America. So I find that to be, in conflict with my faith and my love for life. So I do care about those issues. So to me, like being nonpartisan, which I am, doesn't mean being non-political. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be politically involved. I think that's actually comes with a great degree of privilege in some ways, that opting out could make life more difficult for a lot of people. So it's not a very exciting thing that I do, voting. But I think of it like how can I use this particular action to alleviate the suffering of as many people as possible. And there's not a perfect answer on that, but that's what I'm trying to do when I vote. And I don't think we should confine our voice to one day every 4 years or something. I think we have a lot of ways that we use our voice, our money, and other, things to try to advocate for the most vulnerable people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like what you say as far as privilege is concerned, and I do think that's something that I need to hear for sure. I think that's one thing that I try to live by. I mean, it's more background on me. I actually work at a mega church. The church that I pastor serves it's a community of maybe 400 or 500 people, but it's a church that's kind of spread all over the Southeast. And one conviction that our senior pastor has had since the very beginning in 1988 was not to show any sort of partisan, and to be extremely careful with how you communicate political stuff. And the reason being is that we want to first and foremost be a part of God's kingdom, the kingdom that's coming and is here and is moving and growing. And the thought of aligning with a political party or even a political candidate, it's so polarizing that it seems as if you would shut off a whole demographic of people. Because, like you said, I mean, conservatism, it's people's religion. Should it be? Absolutely not. But do you want to close off any sort of communication between you and that group by aligning with another political party? So, I noticed, I think you tweeted something along the lines of being disappointed Bernie Sanders dropped out, for example. Do you see Bernie as maybe the best chance of getting Trump out of office?
Well, this is my concern, is that and like I said, I'm not partisan. And my friend Tony Campolo, he says it really well. He says, whenever you mix faith with a political party, it's like mixing ice cream and cow manure. It doesn't do it doesn't do much damage to the manure, but it sure messes up the ice cream. And I think that's what happens with, especially when it's overwhelming the number of white evangelicals that supported Trump in the last election, and the Christians that continue to defend them. Like
it's appalling.
Franklin Graham says, God intervened and put Trump in power, and Jerry Falwell calls him like the dream president of Christians. What becomes at stake is not just their reputation and credibility, but ours. I mean, they're speaking for so many people in such a prominent way. So I think that needs to be challenged because they're defending the indefensible. And what I see is that people are leaving the church, but they love Jesus. A lot of young people, especially, they're just dumbfounded by the collision of Christianity and Trump, evangelicalism. Like, it just blows the mind, because that's what I find really concerning. So there's a lot of folks that are dipping out of the church, but they're really rejecting a version of American nationalism that's camouflaging itself as Christianity. But it doesn't pass the litmus test. It doesn't smell like Jesus. When you read the Beatitudes, Jesus is blessing the poor. Jesus is blessing the meek, the merciful. And those are the antithesis of the things that I think we see in a lot of our government right now, So to me, it's my love for Jesus that puts me at odds with the policies of Trump and even his personal life, ethics and I mean, so many things. I just I think he's a symptom of something much bigger. So it's not just about, I'm not anti-Trump as much as I'm pro-Jesus. And we've got much bigger principalities and powers than Trump. But here's the deal is, I also have not been in the business of endorsing candidates. I think that what Christians need to do is we need to look at the values and the implications of the Sermon on the Mount, and how does that inform how we think about welcoming immigrants, for instance, right? Like, and let's allow love, not fear and racism, to shape our policies. And I think that's the real question for a lot of us. Is the Scripture says that love casteth out fear. I think a lot of our policies are being driven by fear and by a kind of fragility in the white, older American population that's shaping a lot of things. And it doesn't, it's not incidental that this comes it's not a coincidence. It comes after Barack Obama, the first black president, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think there's a lot of what people call white lash, that's coming back. And we see this rise in white supremacy and all kinds of things. I mean, even in the last election, I just said, here's just a thought. Maybe Christians shouldn't be endorsing the same candidates as the KKK and the NRA, call me crazy. But, so that is my love for Jesus. And that old hymn says, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. So my hope is not in the DNC or the RNC. My hope is in Jesus, the Lamb of God. But that has political implications. And we got to remember that it wasn't long ago in history that people talked about racism and said that's political and we shouldn't be talking about that in the church. The civil rights movement. Dr. King was very unpopular, and on some of these issues, the Bible was used as a defense. I mean, some of our denominations, the Southern Baptists, were split because they were on the wrong side of history when it came to racism and slavery. And so we haven't dealt with some of that, and that's my concern. Is I believe that salvation is personal, and I believe it's also social or political. It's God so loved the world. The kingdom of God is coming on earth as it is in heaven. So I believe God is healing hearts, and God is a personal God. I also believe that God's transforming the world. So, you think about the civil rights movement, and people would say, well, that's just a sin problem. God needs to heal racist hearts. That's true, but it's also a political and social problem. So we need God to change hearts, but we need to change laws. And that movement would have been incomplete if we didn't allow black folks and white folks to swim in the same swimming pools and to vote and things like that. So I think, we do need God to heal hearts, but we also need our laws to reflect, justice in our society. And the Scriptures have a lot to say about that too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you with Christians and Trump. I mean, when they talk about him being like the answer to prayers, I seriously am just like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? And being from the South, here's one thing that I would say that gets a little frustrating, but I say that with open hands. I totally understand this point of view, but there is like this broad brushstroke of all Trump voters are all racist. All of them hate, black people, don't care about the poor and all of that. And I guess the reason why I say that is because I know people that are, they're just always going to be Republicans. They see it as the right thing. And like you mentioned with abortion being a huge thing, I think a lot of people would say there's no way I could vote for someone that is even going to try to legislate more freedom and pro-choice and all of that. So that's something that I think is tricky for people to be able to separate. There's, not all Trump voters are in this same little category for sure. But one thing I want to ask you is, I think of the ex-evangelical crowd, and obviously that can be defined in so many different ways. I would put myself in that category to some degree. I think that you need to kind of separate it into ex-evangelicals that still are following Jesus, and there's some that have pretty much turned their back on Christianity. But a lot of what I see on social media is not only just standing up for what's right, denouncing Trump, talking about how despicable he is, and all of these things that at the heart of it, I would agree with. But there seems to be this missing component as far as, okay, if you see Trump in that way and you're justified in doing so, you're right. Where's also the love your enemies part? And I just feel like I wish people would communicate their disdain, their disapproval, and at the same time, as Christians, we're even called to love that dude. I don't even know if you pay much attention to social media and all that stuff. Like, do you see this similar? Like, does that rub you the wrong way? Like, it's kind of like, well, where's the Christian part of your heart that even loves that guy?
Oh, I mean, there is no doubt in the world that there's a toxicity to self-righteousness and arrogance that is also nonpartisan, and I think there's different versions of that. I mean, Jesus actually called it the yeast of the Pharisees, and he talked about it like it's going to rot your soul, and so, like I grew up with a conservative version of that. This kind of idea. Thank you that I'm not like those people.
Exactly.
And we would name, but there's also certainly a progressive version of that says, thank you that we're not like those people, And Jesus told a great story about that. One self-righteous Pharisee goes up and says, thank you that I'm not like them. I do all these great things. And then there's another dude, a tax collector, that just beats his chest and says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And that's the posture that Jesus sort of celebrates in that story, So I think that self-righteousness is absolutely toxic, and that sometimes what's just as important as being right is being kind and loving. And you can see, I like how Chesterton said, if I'm too liberal for the conservatives and too conservative for the liberals, I might be right where I'm supposed to be. And the thing is, I get kind of slammed, from the left and the right. And the emails and stuff sound very similar. But there's some things that are not just about left and right politics. They're about right and wrong. And that's what I think we're naming, are some of these things that some Christians are defending, things that were indefensible. I mean, I was very critical of some of Obama's policies, especially when the drones and the militarism, when he bombed the Doctors Without Borders hospital in Afghanistan, other things, I mean, so anyway, but I believe that what we've got to do is still be sprinkled with the fruits of the Spirit. And those are beautiful things: love, kindness, goodness, gentleness. And that's my problem with so much that's happening in the Trumpism, is it doesn't smell like the fruits of the Spirit. It looks more like the 7 deadly sins than the fruit of the Spirit and the Beatitudes that we see in Jesus. And so that's really our litmus test, is Jesus. And I think the best corrective to what's gone wrong in Trump evangelicalism is Jesus. And that's why it's an aging out too. I think there's a whole younger generation that cares about things other than just abortion and gay marriage. They care about the environment. They care about gun violence. They care about restorative justice and mass incarceration. So I'm excited. I mean, I'm really energized by what's happening now. And I believe in life after death. I'm excited, it'll be wonderful. But I also believe in life before death. And I believe that Jesus said, the kingdom of God, we're to seek that it come on earth as it is in heaven. That this is not just about going up when we die, but it's about bringing God's dream on earth. And I think there's a lot of people that are leaving the church because they see it as kind of irrelevant. We're just saying, well, God cares about racism and poverty and war, but, that's why we have heaven when we die. And I see Jesus doing just the opposite. I mean, Jesus is talking about unjust judges and widows and orphans, and he's talking about the rich man and Lazarus living right next to each other. I mean, the gospel that Jesus embodied and lived has everything to do with the world that we live in right now, and just as much as we also look forward to heaven when we die.
Yeah, for sure. I actually grew up with the mentality of this earth and everything in it is going to pass away, so it really doesn't matter. I mean, I seriously, I still have to fight the impulse of not caring. I'm just being honest. Like, I really want to be over and done, but there's just some stuff that's just so deeply embedded. I'm like, get out of me! Like the legalism and all that stuff. It's just, it was my life for a good 20 years.
I heard this preacher say that, he's just hoping to expedite the apocalypse, and that's why he can drive an SUV and not recycle things. And it's absolutely terrible theology, and I think that, the answer to that bad theology isn't no theology, but I think we need some good religion. We need some good theology, and even the KKK, they got a whole section of their website defending why they're a Christian organization. You're like, yeah, man, that's a messed up version of Christianity right there. So anyway,
Isn't it ironic too that when things get rough, Christians, and not all of them, but a lot of evangelical Christians are like, get me out of here, Lord, come, take us all. And it's like, don't you realize that when the going gets rough, this is when the church is supposed to flourish and be a light, and you're wanting to get out of here. and I get it, but it's like, come on, my gosh.
That old saying, it's true, isn't it? That some of us are so heavenly minded, we're not much earthly good. And I think that's the version where, like that. Boy, you got to really look at the what Jesus said and what he lived was absolutely about, transforming the world that we live in and the kingdom coming on earth. So it's good news to the poor.
Yeah. So let me ask this, and it may sound like an oddball question, and you can answer it by saying I don't really like the question. But when you think through politics and your faith and everything, do you want America to be a Christian nation? Because when I look at that, first of all, we're not. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing we said we were a Christian nation when slavery was legal. So we're not deeply embedded in real Christian faith. I don't really need our government to be a Christian government. I don't even know what that means. Like, can a government have salvation? Like, I don't. So, yeah, is it something important for you to see our government act with Christian values?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And here's my thought on it is, Christian is a really bad adjective and a really good noun, like I'm a Christian, but you start to think of like, you can brand anything Christian. But the word means Christ-like. So there's a lot of things that carry the adjective Christian, but they don't look very Christ-like, you know. And I think that, I mean, even America, we are the best at using the Lord's name in vain. I mean, we've literally got it on our money. In God we trust. While at the same time, our economy looks like the 7 deadly sins, you know? So we're very good at using the Lord's name in vain. What I want is, I want to be more Christ-like. And I think that there's many people that are not Christian that really love Jesus. And as Gandhi said, I love Jesus, I just wish the Christians acted more like him. So the values that I see in Jesus are beautiful values. I mean, he himself said that they will know you are Christians by your love, you know, the way that you love each other. So that's what I want. You know, I want a nation that is fueled by love instead of fear. You know, right. by compassion and instead of this myth of scarcity. And a lot of these things that we're hearing, like America first, that's not just a political idea. That's a theological idea. Because the Bible doesn't say God bless America. It said God so loved the world. And so sometimes I think our vision just gets too small. And it's exactly what Jesus was doing when he says, unless you hate your own family, you're not ready to be my disciple. I mean, I think what he's trying to do is expand our love. Mother Teresa said sometimes our biggest problem is that the circle we put around our family is too small. And to me, being a Christian means that we are born again. So we've got a bigger vision than biology. It's why nationalism is too myopic, right? We care about people on the other side of our borders, on the other side of a wall. If someone's hurting, it's just as tragic as if it was our own mother or daughter or son. So that's what I want. I want love to be driving our policies. I'm not looking to brand anything Christian. We're a pluralistic society. But I also know a lot of my Jewish and Muslim friends would like America to be more Christ-like, more loving. Right. And so I think, you know, the language is cheap. And we certainly haven't looked Christ-like through much of our history, though I think there's things that we can celebrate in America that, you know, do honor some of the core things that are in the heart of the Bible and my faith. So this is one of the dangers, though, is, you know, we got this disease. And when you get a vaccination, when it's a watered down version of the disease that knocks it out of you, right? And I think that's what we're in danger of in America, is creating, we're inoculating people from the real thing because they're getting this kind of watered down version of Christianity and they're rejecting that, you know? And that's a big danger. When you talk about the ex-evangelicals, a lot of them have just rejected a really distorted narrative of Christianity that looks more like the Republican Party than Jesus. Right. And like, I'm not interested in that. When people tell me they've given up on Christianity, I'm like, tell me what you gave up on. Because most of the time I've given up on that too. You know, and that's what Frederick Douglass said too. This is not new. You know, Frederick Douglass said, between the Christianity of Christ and the Christianity of this land, I see the widest possible difference. I don't know how you can call them both the same thing, you know? Yeah.
That's so good, man. So, all right, here's some conservativeness that's going to leak out of me, and it's probably a little naive. Do you think it's because I'm with you, man. I actually, so I don't care about our nation being Christian, but I do want to care about our neighbors and to consider them just as valuable. Do you think that we can ever take care of other people at the expense of the people in America? And because I think of government as one of its functions is, you know what, the politicians and everyone that's in charge, one of their priorities needs to be making sure Americans are safe and taken care of. So do you think there's a chance that we sometimes neglect that by trying to help other people?
This is my response to that question. Is that
let's hear it, Shane.
I don't believe that there's scarcity. I don't buy into this idea that God made too many people or not enough stuff. as Gandhi
This is
said,
helpful, man. This is helpful. Keep going.
Gandhi said, "There's enough for everybody's need, but there's not enough for everybody's greed." And there are less than 100 rich people that now own the same amount as half of the world's population. That's a dangerous world when you have masses of our world living in poverty while a handful of people have way more than they can ever imagine. I mean, so I think there's great questions about, should there be a limit to how much? Like maybe it's $1,000 an hour. Is a maximum wage, and there's a minimum wage. There's limits. I think those are ideas worth contemplating. But in our desire is that everybody would have this day their daily bread. I think that governments can play a role in making that harder or making that easier, right? And you mentioned Bernie. There's things I don't agree with Bernie on, but there's, I think when he's talking about wealth and equity, he's got a lot of really solid points. Now, I'm not a socialist, or I always say I'm not anything that ends in ist. I'm a lover trying to follow Jesus, and to love my neighbor as myself means we've got to rethink what's enough. Right? Like as Proverbs says so well, give me neither poverty nor riches, for in my poverty I might be forced to steal, and in my riches I might forget my God. So I think that there is a vision that's all through the Scripture, that there is enough for all of us if some people won't hoard and take too much. And it's our job to try to make sure that the most vulnerable, are really taken care of in that. And I think that we've done a really terrible job of that in kind of the modern state of capitalism, and even in the U.S. The disparities between the 140 million people in the U.S. that are in desperate poverty or low wealth. There's enough. And some of this is our priorities. I believe that budgets are moral documents. They show us, as Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And we've really created an idolatry out of our military and weapons, I think, where right now in the U.S. we're spending about $20,000 a second on militarism. And so Dr. King was right.
I'd like to have just 1 second of that money.
Shoot. We've got 50,000 times the power of the near Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs in our arsenal. I mean, how many times do you need to blow up the world? Like we have created this stockpile of weaponry. That scripture says some may trust in chariots and horses or nuclear bombs, but we trust in our God. I think it really surfaces some important things. So Dr. King, he said, a country that continues to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching a spiritual death. So I am concerned about military spending and other things. And when we think there's this scarcity, we've got to laugh at that lie, because our government can pull money out of the sky for the next war, and they can pull money out of the sky when they need to bail out banks. But when it comes to really those who are most vulnerable, we are really, really struggling in this country. And a lot of it has to do with proximity. I think this is why relationship is so important, is that if we aren't experiencing poverty, if we're not in relationship with people who are hurting, then these just become abstract ideologies, But we're really talking about loving our neighbor as ourselves. And that's what happened with me on so many of these things, like gun violence. I mean, I owned guns growing up. I grew up in Tennessee, where God and guns are like bread and butter, but then you come up here and we're losing 100 lives a day to guns. And we've got memorials, we've got stories on every corner of our block of the person who's died there. And I just think, we can do a better job at protecting lives than we're doing right now. And that's not saying we're going to take away people's hunting rifles and get rid of the Second Amendment. I just think, along with gun owners, we can do a better job at protecting life on this issue.
Maybe take away the Uzis. That'd be a good first step.
AR-15s, we don't have grenades on the street. Why do we have these things? We wrote this book, Beating Guns, and we said, here's the guns that we were talking about when the Second Amendment was written. And it's got a picture of the old they shot 1 round a minute, and then the guns now, we can shoot 100 rounds a minute, and yet our laws around that have evolved almost not at all. Whereas you think about cars and stuff, we do all kinds of new laws and restrictions, and if you use one irresponsibly, you lose your license, all that stuff, and cars aren't even designed to kill, but they can. So we just do a better job at protecting life.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about the disparity of riches and the stats that you were giving, my first thought is, gosh, I wish those people could be generous. I wish these people could contribute more. And I do think that there are some rich people that do that. Like I guess it sounds pretty trite to say, but I would call them almost like righteous rich, like they're actually using their riches to help other people. But that I think about limiting someone's resources, and the thing that I would be afraid of is that we're assuming that the government who is doing this, that they're pure of heart and that they have great intentions. And, I would be scared of the government becoming bigger because I don't necessarily trust the government too. So it's a huge mess in my head, but yeah, I like the thought. I want more people to be taken care of for sure.
Well, I mean, one of the things is that some of these corporations are bigger than the government. They're more powerful than the government. When they need to be bailed out, the government will bail them out. When we talk about like welfare queens, people say that sometimes as if it's poor people. We got some corporate welfare queens that are like, actually, they are literally buying private jets at the same time that the government's bailing them out. So I think those are the disparities that more and more young people especially see. And they're also going like, I mean, sometimes it's not about how much you give, it's about how much you have left, and when this recent gesture of charity from Facebook and, Zuckerberg and who was the other, Bezos, I think they gave like $25 million, and people said, well, that's like every person that's making $40,000 giving $5. It's nice, but it's also about how much you got left and how much you continue to make while you're not even providing face masks for the workers in Amazon. Like, these things are not, they're not like, there's kind of a false dualism and dichotomy, I think, sometimes that we go, well, it's either this or this, but there's actually a much more reasonable way down the middle where we can do multiple things. Like even if some of these CEOs, the average CEO is making 400 times the average worker. I mean, this is unbelievable disparity, and you go, well, it hasn't always been that way. I mean, like that wage increase has happened in our lifetime, that in like the 1970, the average worker was making about the same that they are now, but the average CEO was making a whole lot less, and that disparity has changed in our lifetime. So you go, maybe no one should make more than $1,000 an hour, or maybe we just tax them more, and I think that's what a lot of this conversation has been about. If you're going to make more than $100 million in 1 year, then you should be given more, so that people can have health care and our schools can have, like the school here doesn't even have air conditioning, so it's got 104 degrees. They have to let the kids out. It's crazy. Yeah. We don't have air conditioning for our public schools, but we got 50,000 bombs. Something ain't right about that.
Yeah. I know this doesn't sound too conservative of me, but I actually, probably for the first time in my life, that does make sense. It's like, hey, you're an American, you're bringing in millions or billions, contribute more, contribute a higher percentage. Help out here. All right, so one more question about America, and then
let me just say one more thing on this, because I want to be really clear that I don't think you can legislate love.
Yeah.
And
I agree. I think that's what I'm stuck at,
no
too.
law can change the human heart, like greed, racism. God needs to change those things, and that's why I am not fully invested in political ideology. Like I think our government should do a better job at protecting the poor and protecting life. But like at the end of the day, I think like it is holy work of God to change hearts and the church to participate in that. In the same line, I do believe that our our laws and policies need to reflect that kind of compassion and love and justice for everybody. So I think we can do better, Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's Dr. King that said, at least a law can keep somebody from killing me.
Yeah.
It may not make them less racist, but it might be able to limit how much they can kill people.
Totally. All right. One more American question, and then a couple questions about your faith and what you think of the church. You got time for that?
Yeah, man, we're good.
All right.
This is cool. Fun. I like it.
Yeah. So I'm notorious for extreme examples, but we're talking about justice. And so I want to throw World War II at you. And I don't know if you would consider yourself a pacifist. I think you do.
I'm not crazy about these words. You've heard me say I don't like the is. So, because here's why though, man.
Stop with these labels, Joey. Knock it off.
But I think sometimes we use them to say, "Oh, I got you boxed in." I got you figured out. And actually, what I see Jesus doing is blowing those boxes up.
Yeah,
right.
You're
So anyway, I would say that I am a peacemaker, and that I do not believe that there is a way to justify and defend violence in light of the Prince of Peace. So my commitment to Jesus means that I'm committed to nonviolence.
Yeah. So do you think that there's ever a time when peace is the most unloving thing? So obviously this is low-hanging fruit. It's probably the easiest to evaluate, but especially if America is aware of the Holocaust happening. I don't think we were. I guess I don't know my history as well as I should. I don't think we were aware that was going on, at least not to that degree. But we're looking at Adolf Hitler. We're seeing what's happening. We're seeing the world being taken over. And I think about, Jesus says, love others as you love yourself. So it seems like, is there ever a time when peace, just because of this fallen world, because of how things are with all of our hearts being corrupted, is peace ever the unloving thing? Would you have been on board if we're sitting here super old dudes reflecting on World War II? Would you have been on board with just staying out of it and just seeing how it plays out?
I do not think that silence is an option. I don't believe, just opting out and saying, well, this is their issue or this is a political issue. We're just going to try to save as many souls as possible while Hitler's just burning people up. I mean, that's messed up theology, right? This is what I would say to that, though, is that Hitler came to power by twisting the cross into a swastika, and by misusing, abusing the Bible. And saying, just as Jesus cleansed the temple of the Jews, I'm cleansing the world of them. That's what he did. He used the Bible to Christianize, sanctify, baptize his violence, right? And it was largely the silence and complicity of the church that allowed the rise of Hitler. Now, I think that there's many parallels. I'm certainly not comparing Trump directly to Hitler, but I think that there are many parallels to what silence and apathy and even bad theology that says this is political, it's not for us to do, ends up costing a lot of lives. What the church did also was that there was the whole confessing church movement, of Bonhoeffer and others. There were communities like the Bruderhof that refused to teach Nazism and to adhere to Nazism, but they were also against the war. So some of these communities were sent to concentration camps and they were ostracized from Germany during the war. And I think that's the kind of misfits that Christians end up being in these conflicts. So I do not think that we can justify violence, but there are parts of me that understand why there was an assassination plot to take out Hitler. And, there's a lot of details that are debatable in that. But there's Bonhoeffer and others were a part of this community that ended up, some of them carried out an assassination attempt. And there's a movie, man, I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Blind Spot, but it interviews Hitler's secretary. And the bomb went off in just a way that Hitler was protected from it.
Yeah.
And she said, at that moment, he became more convinced than ever before that God had protected him and went forward with his mission with a renewed fervor. So on that day, I'd say like the cross lost, But here's the deal, is that Bonhoeffer ended up being executed, and a lot of other folks as well. But what Bonhoeffer said is, let no one try to justify or defend this violence. And he was willing to say, let's call it evil, even if someone thinks it's a necessary evil. Now, in the end, I actually believe they were wrong in trying to assassinate Hitler. I think there's a lot of other ways that we should resist, and we should be willing to die, but not kill. And that's what I see in Jesus, is that there's something worth dying for, but nothing worth killing for. And we can still think that it's courageous to try to defend innocent lives with violence. But I would say it diverges from the example of Jesus. And most poignantly, when his own disciple Peter picks up a sword and tries to protect Jesus, cuts a guy's ear off, and Jesus scolds Peter, heals the man, and Tertullian, one of the great thinkers of the early church, he said, when Jesus disarmed Peter, he disarmed every one of us. Because if ever there was a case to be made for using redemptive violence to try to protect the innocent, Peter had a really great case. And so at the end of the day, I got a zealous spirit in me. And I think that's why Jesus invited zealots to be a part of his movement. But he's also challenging their sword and teaching them a way that we interact with violence without mirroring that violence. Because if we aren't careful, we become the very beast that we're trying to battle. And interestingly enough, after the Holocaust, the Jewish community was against the death penalty. After apartheid in South Africa, they ended the death penalty because they said violence is the problem, not the solution. And I think that's what we've got to really insist, is that we don't solve violence with violence any more than you solve hatred with hatred, as Dr. King said. Only love can overcome hatred, and only nonviolence can overcome violence.
Yeah. You're probably right, and it's frustrating.
There's a good book, dude. If I'm going to tell you one book, it's my friend Ron Sider. It's on my shelf back here. It's called Nonviolent Action, and the whole book is about nonviolent resistance to evil. And because he actually validates this argument that, well, nonviolence is great in certain situations, but not in totalitarian dictatorships and regimes. And he kind of goes through history. And I think you can use history and you can say violence has worked and violence has failed, just as you can look at history and say nonviolence has worked and nonviolence has failed. But at the end of the day, the question is, which looks most like Jesus?
Yeah. And, it goes back to what you were saying as far as like working out your salvation with fear and trembling, working out your politics. And so what I'm about to say, I'm working this stuff out. But I see when Jesus disarmed Peter, put, was it Malchus's ear back on? Is that his name? And I see that as Jesus saying, look, I am operating from a different kingdom. That is all I'm about right now. You are very short-sighted with what is going on. My kingdom is what's important. I just don't know if that's possible when it comes to worldly kingdoms. So I almost, there's sometimes when I think that war is a super tragic result of fallen nature. Like I don't know if because I think of some of the just wars that have been fought for the cause of humanity, for taking care of our for rescuing people and all of that. So that's so I almost see it as individual Christians, we operate from God's kingdom's perspective, but we're also part of worldly kingdoms that they're not Christian kingdoms, and while they're in this evil world, there's stuff that has to happen. But that probably turns your stomach, doesn't it, Shane?
You know what? I can find some common ground with you on a couple of things that you said, and one of those is one of the things that I think you might vibe with here is that don't we want to limit people's capacity to do harm.
Right.
And right, because like we are sinful beings, and yes, you can kill someone with a spoon or a knife, but you can kill a whole lot of people with an AR-15 that's designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. You know, we think about nuclear weapons and we go, you know, there's like 15,000 nuclear warheads in the world, and only 9 countries out of 196 own them. We own half of those in just our country, right? So you go, wow, like, and we're the only country that's ever used them, right? We dropped the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb in 1 week, right? And so I think that's where you see the massive, like, ability of humans to do so much horror. And that's where I go, man, Christians, we should be the biggest we're followers of the Prince of Peace. We should be the biggest champions of getting rid of nuclear weapons or limiting high capacity magazines, like where sinful people can do so much damage. I mean, even, you know, I was in Iraq during the war, and this Iraqi man, I'll never forget, he said,
"All right, tell me why you were there. What the heck were you doing?"
I was in Iraq because after the September 11th, I thought we need courage right now. But I got to know many of the folks who their loved ones were killed in September 11th, and they said, we don't want our grief to be a war cry. We don't want to see more violence that mirrors the violence that was done to us. And so I went on a delegation to Iraq in 2003 of peacemakers. And we had veterans, we had doctors and nurses, we were volunteering in the hospitals, but we happened to be there during the bombing, the shock and awe campaign. Like 900 bombs a day were getting dropped in Iraq, and it was horrific. I've written about it. I mean, it transformed me, and it actually shaped so much of my passion that violence isn't going to get rid of violence. So while we were there, and my dad was in Vietnam, actually. My family very familiar with the military. So while we were there, though, this Iraqi guy goes, well, you know that your country knows that Saddam Hussein has some weapons because you have the receipts from them. And you begin to realize that the 60 Bell helicopters that Saddam used to gas the Kurds, which was our justification for intervening here, was the things that, we armed him. We helped him go to, put him back. So we have had weapons contracts with like 150 countries around the world. And it's kind of like if I were selling guns in my neighborhood and going, hey, young people, don't kill each other. Like that doesn't, you live by the sword, you die by the sword, Jesus said. So I think like what I'm, can really find common ground with you on is trying to figure out, how do we harness evil and violence in the world? How do we become bigger champions of life? And in the end, I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do in every situation, but whether I live or die, I think that our life is a witness of Christ. And I'm going to hope that no matter what situation that I'm in, that I would follow Jesus, even in the way that he died, forgiving those who are hurting him. I hope I have the courage.
Shane, thanks so much,
That was
man.
great, dude.
Awesome stuff. Your voice is needed. Keep talking, keep writing, keep tweeting.